Smart Grid Security, the Kansas City, Kansas story. A few housekeeping notes we would like to mention. If you cannot get adequate sound from your computer speakers, you may dial into the audio portion listed in the right-hand corner of your interface under the audio section. Today's speakers, I'm happy to introduce, are Nadia Bartol. She's the Senior Cybersecurity Strategist at the Utilities Telecom Council. Paul Paulsek, Director of Information Technology at the Kansas City Board of Public Utilities. And Ed Barrett, Director of Technology and Standards at Elster. I'm now happy to turn the floor over to the moderator of today's event, Martin Rosenberg, Editor-in-Chief, EnergyBiz Magazine. Marty, welcome to the event. You have the floor.
Thank you, and thank you all for joining us this morning. We have a really wide-ranging conversation lined up for the next hour for all of you on the all-important topic of smart grid security. This has been a topic we've focused on at our EnergyBiz forum in March in Washington. It's of paramount importance across the industry. I just am back from the EEI annual meeting in Las Vegas, where it was also talked about. And one of the interesting themes that I picked up there is a sense in the industry that a lot of the smart intelligence that's been deployed that many thought would be used to provide new services and information to customers is being seen as having perhaps more immediate relevance and importance in telling the operators of the power sector vital information on how to better assess what's going on out there in the field and make it more secure. Those are some of the things we're going to be talking about in the next hour. And to kick us off, from more of a 30,000-foot view of the entire topic, I'm very pleased to introduce Nadia Bartol, who's a Senior Cybersecurity Strategist at the Utilities Telecom Council. Nadia played a key role in helping me envision our conference where we tackled this subject, and it's a pleasure, Nadia, to re-engage with you on this important topic. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Marty. Good morning and good afternoon, everybody, depending on where you are. It is great to be here. So as Marty said, my job is to provide context for this panel from a 20,000-foot view. So I decided to look up what is smart grid and where does one look these days other than Wikipedia. So this is what Wikipedia says about smart grid. A smart grid is a modernized electrical grid that uses analog or digital information and communications technology to gather and act on information, such as information about the behaviors of suppliers and consumers, in an automated fashion to improve the efficiency, reliability, economics, and sustainability of the production and distribution of electricity. Now, being a standards developer and a part of my job, I know how definitions are written, so I looked at this and I said, okay, this needs to be simpler. So here's my translation. Smart grid is an intelligent electrical grid that uses technology and information to optimize performance and inform all stakeholders about it. Next slide, please. And so why is it important? Why is smart grid important? Marty already touched on this, but I thought this graphic from Intel and these numbers from Intel were absolutely staggering. We're about to have 31, I think this is 1 trillion, devices connected to the web in 2020, and many of these devices will participate in smart grid or will rely on the smart grid to operate. Now, interestingly enough, while the number of devices is expected to skyrocket exponentially, the number of people that will work with these devices and service them and design networks that support them will surely increase, but not nearly at this rate. So there's all kinds of challenges associated with that. Next slide, please. Smart grid reliance on ICT makes it necessary to ensure that it's designed, architected, and implemented to minimize and manage security risks. Some communities don't lock their doors, but the internet is not a kind of a community, and we need to lock our doors now to ensure that the grids, in this particular case, that the grid's operation is reliable, smooth, efficient, and therefore secure. So this interesting diagram comes from NIST. It shows something that I didn't realize myself until I looked at it, and I've looked at it before, of course. The electrical flows that are denoted with dotted lines are kind of obvious from generation to transmission, distribution to customer. But the secure communication flows that are in solid lines are all over the place. So everybody communicates with everybody, and there's more domains, there's more players in this graph than just the electrical system. So secure communications are absolutely critical to move this data back and forth and to provide it to the right people at the right time. Next slide, please. I believe the smart grid security people refer to this as spaghetti chart. What it basically does, it articulates now individual actors and systems within those domains. It's color-coded. And the point of this chart is that it's really complicated, and all of these different actors and systems still need to have secure and reliable communications among them, and that's not easy. Next slide, please. Electric companies, the power industry already lives in very rich legal regulatory standards environment. There is a NIST document that I've used, NIST IR 7628, that speaks to smart grid security. There's, of course, NERC for a portion of the industry. There is state and local regulators with NERC as an association of the regulators. There's NRC. There's a variety of different bodies. However, the most recent development is the executive order, presidential executive order, that was issued in February 2013, and the NIST cybersecurity framework that was tasked by the order that was released in 2014. The framework was developed by industry and convened by NIST. So as we're all learning as the industry, NIST is asking us to actually not call it NIST cybersecurity framework. They're asking us to call it cybersecurity framework because we developed it with their help convening these massive groups of people to do so. The framework applies to all critical infrastructure sectors. It's sector neutral. It is scalable. And it helps us think about cybersecurity and communicate it to different stakeholders. There isn't a lot of new information in the framework. It actually is standards-based, so kind of, the two different quadrants on this graphic speak to each other. But what's new in it is a very strong risk-based approach, and that's a really good thing. So the bottom line on the slide is that there's a lot of information out there. Oh, and there are efforts by public, private, all kinds of sector organizations working to develop kind of usage guidelines for the framework, and that's in the left bottom corner of the slide, together with the information security, information sharing analysis centers and other bodies. So really, we have lots of help from various people. We have laws, we have regulations, we have standards, we have guidelines, we have best practices, we have information sharing stuff. There's a lot of, this is a content-rich field and content-rich industry. Next slide, please. What I want to conclude with is the fact that we have substantial challenges. We've made a lot of progress, but the challenges remain. So the threat agents don't need a framework, they don't have laws and regulations, and they don't do a risk assessment in people-based time. When something happens, we feel an urge to convene, to talk, to decide. They move much faster than we do. They move in internet time. We move in people time. And while there are some tools and techniques out there that automate obvious pieces of the response, we need more. And then technology continues to evolve, so what we knew how to protect yesterday, we need to work on for today and tomorrow in terms of risk management. Regulation doesn't stand still. We all know that NERC 5 is, there are changes currently under review and discussion. Framework implementation will introduce further practices that we'll need to work on, so it will continue evolving. Qualified workforce. Remember the exponential growth in devices? Well, again, we all know that there aren't enough people who are qualified in cybersecurity. There are some amazing numbers out there that I hesitate to quote for how many jobs are unfilled in the world in cybersecurity. And there's even fewer people who understand both cybersecurity and utilities networks and smart grid networks. And while there is good work going on in establishing classes and training and education and certifications, it all takes time, and then training people takes time. So in the meanwhile, we have fewer people than we need to do things with. Of course, IT-OT convergence, which is being driven by smart grid and cybersecurity, according to some of the UTC member utilities. And the convergence is caused by the fact that most of OT now runs in the same technology as IT, subject to the same vulnerabilities, but it is in different departments in an organization, the utility. So over the last 2 years, I've seen numerous utilities put these organizations together into the same executive, create cross-functional teams, and sometimes give one person responsibility over IT, OT, telecom, cybersecurity, and sometimes even physical security. So there is a understanding of the need to talk and work together in our space. And that affects smart grid hopefully positively. The last item on the list of challenges is assurance practices, which basically refers to the fact that utilities and energy industry relies on their ICT vendors, information and communication technology vendors, to produce products that will not increase, not expand their risk profile. Practices are evolving as well. They are not all where they need to be, and we're working on them as the industry. So that is the final challenge. Not to finish on a low note, I want to finish on a high note. A company called BitSight, which is essentially an independent metrics indicator collection company, published a survey at the end of May, and they looked at 4 different industries. They looked at financial services, utilities, health, and retail. Now, they use internet traffic data to create an index of company cybersecurity performance. It's kind of like a credit score for a company based on its publicly available network behavior. They survey Fortune 500 or S&P 500 companies, and utilities came as a close second after financial services, which was really good news. Now, this is not a full picture. This is not the entire industry. This is not all of the practices. This is what was gatherable over the internet. But that's an independent indicator based on traffic of the fact that we're actually not so bad at this after all. So on this happy note, this concludes my remarks, and I'd like to hand it back over to Marty.
Thank you, Nadia. Paul Posek is Director of Information Technology at the Kansas City Board of Public Utilities. He will take us from the overview that Nadia just so ably presented and give us a ground level view of what it means where the rubber hits the road at a utility right here in the middle of the United States. Paul?
Thank you, Marty. Next slide, please. The Kansas City Board of Public Utilities has provided safe, dependable water and electric service in Kansas City, Kansas now for over 100 years. There are some 2,000 public utilities in the United States and 119 here in the state of Kansas. Nationally, BPU is the 46th largest electric utility with 63,000 customers and is the 59th largest in electric revenues at $215 million. BPU also serves the water needs of our 130 square mile service territory here in Kansas. We have over 50,000 water customers, and I'm proud to say that our smart grid AMI network includes both water and electric meters. Next slide. Many times during our installation, I've certainly had to say, what have we gotten ourselves into? You know, we can buy firewalls, intrusion protection devices, software. We can buy words of wisdom from consultants, and we can acquire and read all the white papers, standards, and reports from DHS and NIST. And our smart grid guy here in the corner wonders, what does all this have to do with keeping the lights on and the water running? Well, then there's the President's Executive Order on Cybersecurity, NIST Security Framework, Homeland Security Directives, NERC's Electric Subsector Coordinating Council. The list goes on. And even the Sue Kelly, who is CEO for the American Public Power Association, during testimony in front of the Senate Energy Committee hearing, urged the Senate to pass legislation to improve information sharing between federal government and the electric industry, and noted that within the federal mandatory standards for users, owners, and operators of the bulk power system, it's still unclear as to who exactly falls within those categories. She went on to say that in theory, anyone who turns on a toaster is one of those people. Well, at least my guy there in the corner in the smart grid certainly does understand toasters, but we're certainly learning about smart grid and security. What our smart grid team and the BPU at large need to understand is there are three important attributes defining our smart grid security. Certainly confidentiality, making sure that authorized BPU people have access to use and the information appropriately. Next, data integrity is extremely important to us, working to ensure that it's valid and reliable and coming from the right information sources. And last, availability. We're certainly working to achieve 99% uptime. So what's Kansas City Board of Public Utilities doing to safeguard our assets and customers? Next slide, please. We're going to burp it. And by that I mean there are four main reasons why data breaches occurs. Misunderstanding of risk, insufficient testing, lack of cybersecurity awareness, and inadequate cybersecurity training. And then to start out, we've been building our smart grid from the ground up for over 2 years now. My boss certainly wants to hear the words, "It's done," but we continue to work with Elster to push firmware out to the meters, adjust gatekeeper schedules, a continuous process of testing, improving, and optimizing the network and our processes. For example, we're in a phase 2 testing of our smart meter to meter head-end meter data management system to billing, and that requires over 160 testing scenarios across users of 6 different departments. Doing this testing, though, is how we're learning what is and how our smart grid operates, and that knowledge is going to help us with user awareness. The reality is that smart grid security is inconsistent with convenience. At first glance, any security measure we put into play seems more like a roadblock to getting things done. So it is key to communicate the importance of security to our smart grid team and to the utility as a whole. We can't begin to protect without our users having a clear understanding of smart grid information assets, the ecosystem, and the business activity. And here again, the majority of user awareness is gained through testing scenarios, and the notes and the logs that are spawned by testing provides the fodder for risk assessment. The 3 main causes of security breaches are attacks, system glitches, and human error. And according to a recent study, a negligent employee or contractor could be the cause of anywhere between 20 and 40% of all security breaches. It seems like it should be common sense that a utility should develop best practices about collecting and handling smart grid data, but coming up with a foolproof plan is easier said than done, and it often comes down to modifying employees' behavior and adding to the number of tasks they have to perform. As these tasks are identified, we are using them to help develop policy and procedures. And policy is typically a document that outlines specific requirements or rules that must be met. Standards are a collection of system-specific, procedural-specific requirements that certainly have to be met. And guidelines are a collection of systems-specific procedures that suggest for the best practice. The challenge here is that policy will require our technical, our legal, our regulatory, and likely even marketing people to participate. And then we have to go before a board to get approval. policy, procedure, guidelines, etc. are about things going correctly, but what happens when things go wrong? That's where incident handling comes in. What happens after an attack? Yes, this kind of adds more policies and a step-by-step guideline that need to be developed, but incident handling is an action plan for dealing with intrusions, cyber theft, denial of service, fire, floods, other events. But most of these items we are practicing or learning about doing our system testing. We are preparing to develop a 6-step process: preparation, identification, containment, eradication, recovery, and lessons learned, and I expect to draw upon the experience and the notes from our user acceptance testing and industry case studies, as well as data breaches outside our industry, and especially in retail, such as the recent one with Target stores. Lastly, I can't say enough about training. Training users is many times considered a lost cause, but is one of the most important things we do. According to Verizon's 2014 data breach report, users have discovered more security breaches than any other internal process or technology. Training is all about arming our smart grid staff with the knowledge and skills they need to recognize and report potential incidents quickly, and this knowledge is acquired by building the smart grid and testing the smart grid. Last, in conclusion, I'd like to say that the Kansas City smart grid security story is a continuing story as we evolve to meet new business needs and security threats. And I would certainly like to thank you for this opportunity to speak, and back to you, Marty.
Thank you, Paul. So we've heard from Nadia sketching the overall issues and themes that we want to address this morning. And we've heard from Paul on what it means at the ground level of the utility. I'm pleased to turn to Ed Garrison now, Director of Technology and Standards at Elster. Companies like Elster play an important role bridging the world between the themes that Nadia laid out and the day-to-day practicalities that Paul asked to address. And we're pleased to thank Elster as a sponsor of this broadcast and making it possible. Ed, it's your turn.
Well, thanks, Marty. I should probably say first thing about myself. As a Director of Technology and Standards, one of the things that I deal with much of the time is detail. So I'll apologize in advance if there's too much detail in this or too little. You can certainly ask for more in the questions. So if we go to the next slide, one of the questions is, what are you securing? Are you securing the right things in the right way and with the right tools? And as you see on the right there, that photo is a very expensive lock securing only a small fraction of a bicycle. Clearly not what was intended by whoever's bicycle is no longer there. And this brings up, an interesting problem that we've seen in smart grid deployment in the general, and also in trying to do security of systems and systems of systems. And that is that if you have a great lock, like presumably this might be, but if it's misapplied, it won't do what it is you need it to do, which is to keep the right things secure. So rather than securing just the front wheel, we have to think about securing the entire bicycle. So if we go to the next slide, one of the things that's useful as a first step for trying to figure out how to do this security of the smart grid is identifying what assets you've got and also the assets of your customers that you have in your care. For example, we've all heard of recent stories of giant retail firms being hacked and losing huge numbers of credit cards and names and addresses and that kind of thing. Those are assets that don't necessarily immediately come to mind, but you do not want to be the person who reads about such a breach from your own utility in their local newspaper. One of the other things that's useful is to perform a threat analysis. And there are many different ways of doing that, and I won't go into details on what those are or how one does that, except to suggest that if you only read one document on the whole topic, personally I would recommend the NIST Special Publication 800-82. It's all about the security of SCADA systems in particular, but it applies to much of what we do trying to secure the utilities, customers, and assets. Now, the last point on this slide is to prioritize based on both available resources and the criticality. If you have one very critical asset, then it's very easy to say, well, we should apply all of our dollars to that, but of course that's not a practical way to do that. It sounds silly to say that, however, that kind of error actually has been made before, of overly concentrating on just how critical the asset is and not thinking about where those security dollars and resources might otherwise be applied, perhaps with better effect. So if we could go to the next slide. This slide is, as you can see, it's a pie chart. And the pie chart depicts a series of 377 individual hacking attempts on one computer over the last 6 months. And that one computer happens to be mine. It's my home computer that's internet-facing on 24/7. This chart was created by analyzing the log file that I keep on my computer and then using GeoIP location to map the IP address to a particular country. Now, that's imprecise, so these numbers won't necessarily always be correct. But the key point to this is that my one computer, which is a really tiny little thing, with really no critical stuff on it whatsoever, has been a subject of all of these attacks, 377 individual hack attempts from 43 different countries over the course of the past 6 months. So if this is happening on my one computer at my one house, then it's certain that it's going to be happening on many of your utilities assets as well. And so if we go to the next slide, you can see that one of the important things to do here is to monitor the logs. A lot of the equipment that you have has logging capability. It has quite a huge number of options available, but the logs don't help unless somebody actually looks at them. Or if you have automated systems that can tell you which things might actually be most interesting. You need to make sure that both the IT and the operations folks are involved in security, because as Paul pointed out, that if you only have operations or just the IT folks in there, you might not necessarily make sure you both keep the lights on and have things secure. And then obviously keeping employees informed and aware. The training that Paul underscored as being vital is very important. So the next slide is working with vendors. That's a bit of self-interest perhaps, but the people who have designed and built the equipment from which your smart grid system is made can be valuable allies in being able to show how it is that they have been designed, different ways of securing those, and then the selection process. So if you're thinking about buying new equipment or new software, it's important to consider the real-world security. And by that, what I mean is tested real-world security, not something that looks good on paper but fails under a load, for example. And the way you can verify that is both before you've made a decision and then also afterwards. It's important to actually verify vendor follow-through. In other words, don't just take my word for it, make me prove it. And a number of ways that Kansas City, for example, has been doing this is first site acceptance testing, so when you first get this shiny new system installed, to make sure that it actually meets performance criteria and security criteria up front before you sign off on it. And then audits, being able to audit the vendor, make sure that they've actually done what they're saying they're going to do, they produce things in the way they said they're going to produce them. And then finally, security testing and evaluation, either your own or you can hire a third party to do that. And on my last slide, one thing I wanted to point out here is that field devices are different. So there is a great deal of expertise in information technology, office LAN kind of stuff that's very valuable, very useful to be able to try to transfer that and use some of that knowledge and experience and tools for securing the smart grid. But there are some differences that it's very important to be aware of and to emphasize here. One thing is scalability. If we're talking about hundreds of computers or even thousands of computers within an office environment, that's one thing. But if we're talking about things like a deployment of millions of meters, it's quite a different scale. Verifying that the operations folks are deeply involved. Again, as Paul said, the idea of having multiple departments weighing in on both what the testing should be and then actually performing that is extremely important. And then system performance. One of the things that was mentioned again earlier was that security can be inconsistent with convenience. That leads to a temptation to turn off security features because they're inconvenient, but obviously that's not a good long-term plan. And then finally, verifying that continued operations actually are possible even after a catastrophic event is extremely important. And an example of that would be Hurricane or the Superstorm Sandy that ravaged the Northeast relatively recently here. If restoration of that widespread damage had required, for example, communications of all of the field computers with the back office as they're out there in the field, that might not have worked because a lot of communications that one might otherwise have been able to use would have been down. And so thinking about those kinds of scenarios is vital. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Marty, and I think we can start the questions.
Thanks, Ed. The first question I'd like everyone to take a swing at is how fast is the threat changing and evolving, and how fast are the capabilities of responding to those threats evolving? And after we get into that, I'd like to discuss how to cope with that change. Nadia, you want to start us off? How fast is the threat changing, and how fast are our tools for dealing with it evolving?
Sure. So threat is evolving quite fast. When in February 2013, when the Mandiant report came out, actually I think whenever it came out, a month later, I heard Kevin Mandia speak about the change, what changes Mandiant have observed since publication of the report. And there were already significant behavioral changes of the threat agents that were described in that report. The techniques, I don't think they're evolving as fast, which is why personally I put great emphasis on what Ed and Paul talked about, like testing, like discussing things with your vendors, basically process-based assurance techniques that help you have a process that you know how to perform to quickly respond. There's a whole bunch of preventive things that we do that we know work, but things are going to happen. They're going to happen more or less of different significance, and having those processes ready to go and well-oiled is critical because we don't always know what exactly is going to happen.
Paul, I'd like to ask you, you've had quite a long and illustrious career in this industry. How do you make the pace of evolving threats and pace of change in dealing with those threats Is it something you've dealt with in the past, or is this something you have not had to really deal with until fairly recently?
Well, security and network security and application security has certainly been around for years. And so Smart Grid just moves those security requirements. Really right now I have 120,000 endpoints somewhere out in that 30 square mile territory. So it's widening, and we're adding on. And so what I think is key is that the participation in the information sharing groups and stuff. It's pointed out to me many times that the bad guys certainly know where the blogs are and communicate quickly, and then the good guys have to do that same thing. We have to share information. Now, I'm also a member of the local Kansas City InfraGuard chapter, which is a group works with the FBI, and so we meet regularly on discussions about both physical and cybersecurity. And so I think as a steward of that, the smart grid here, it's on me to continue to participate in groups and sessions like this webinar to stay sharp on what those kind of activities are, to share information with other utilities and other people here so that we are all learning on how good guys protect against that, because the bad guys are certainly talking.
Ed, that's pretty scary what you showed us about your home computer, and I just wondered, as a solution provider that's out there to help Paul and Nadia with the industry response to all these evolving, fast-changing threats, how do you put in place solutions today that could very well be obsolete in 6 months, and how do you put in place an evolving solution strategy?
Yeah, well, that's actually an excellent question, and it's well put. As one of the guiding principles behind the design work that we do and have done is that we assume that change is going to be required. Security isn't really a destination, it's a process. So we aren't ever going to get to a point where we can say, okay, everybody can relax because now we're perfectly secure. And so because of that, because it's an evolution and a continuous evolution, one of the important things from a security point of view, from a vendor's view, is to be able to make sure that devices and systems are upgradable even after they're delivered and deployed.
Nadia, do you want to weigh on that too? How do you put in place a strategy that's flexible enough to not make today's investment obsolete a year or two out?
Well, I fully agree with what both Paul and Ed said, and I want to go back to the notion of security as a process. So you need to know how much you like to sleep at night. You need to know what your risk appetite is, and kind of go from there. And of course, it's influenced by the regulations if you're a NERC-CIP entity. But you need to know what your risk appetite is, and then you need to make choices for the processes that you have and the training that you have, and how you talk to your vendors about their products and services based on those that risk appetite. And it will be a combination of process-based solutions and product-based solutions that are flexible in the way that Ed described, that will be upgradable and kind of they can be improved in the future. And there are new technologies being at least discussed and developed out there that actually kind of adjust the word that is used as self-healing, but I think it's really early in the process, so we don't really have those yet.
Nadia, as one of your bullet points, you called out the importance of having a qualified workforce. As you do your work at the UTC, are you finding enough people at the utility end, and be candid here, literate on all these issues and up to speed, or is there a lot of remedial education that needs to take place?
There is certainly a lot of people in the community able to speak about this with authority and with knowledge and with great knowledge. I still believe that there is not enough people who can speak to multiple topics. So I will meet utilities who are extremely knowledgeable about some topics but not others, and the same with, and we can't all know everything, but I think it's this collective knowledge of everything that we're still working on, and it's challenging because you don't have necessarily, there's not only not enough people to do, qualified today, now, to do the job, but there's also, we're working on it, but we're working on the fact that the leaders, the cybersecurity leaders who are able to speak to the board, they're able to speak to executives, also need to be there. So the entire industry is working on this, whether it's through cross-training or standing up new certifications. There are some absolutely amazing folks from the vendor community migrating from IT to more of a utility converged space with the OT flavor. It's an industry-wide push.
Paul, let me ask you, as you do your work as Director of IT at DPU, how do you find your workforce out there? Are they all very interested and eager to learn? Are you finding younger employees more flexible than older employees? What's the reality out there?
Well, there's certainly a combination. And again, we're certainly suffering from a lot of employees that have been here for years that certainly know the systems and stuff that aren't moving to the new systems as well as we'd like sometimes. But but they need to pass down their knowledge to younger folks. And again, typically some of the kind of things that we're working with at a utility aren't taught in schools. They're learning about LAN network, application development and things in almost a general sense, but then how that's applied to a utility business model, how that's applied to operations technology. And certainly we've previously had divisions between who was doing operations technology versus who's doing information technology. And so that's coming together. I am part of IT is here at Kansas City Board of Public Utilities is part of operations, electric operations technology. And so we work closely with all the electric ops folks to better understand what their problems are, what they're doing, and then involve them and help educate them on what data security and try to bring them up. But it is tough finding new employees, new technical people, young ones to bring them in, because it takes time to train them, get them ready so that they understand not only the technology but the business. It's tough finding those kind of people.
And we have a question from a listener. Are there any estimates of the investment that will be required to secure the grid, and what will be the impact of that on consumer rates? Have you seen any broad estimates of what's going to cost? Is it going to be significant, relatively insignificant? What's the magnitude of what we're talking about?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think the magnitude will be fairly large, which is a very vague answer, but I'm afraid that's all I can offer at the moment, for the reason that, again, as things evolve, as the smart grid is deployed, utilities won't be buying they won't be buying security. They're not looking at a security thing to add on to a widget, a meter, for example. What they'll be looking for is a security or devices and systems that have security as one of the many attributes. One of the other attributes they'll certainly be looking at is cost and cost-benefit ratios. So I think that the net effect of all of this on consumer rates is likely to be that it will result in potentially lower rates than if we don't do this. And the reason I say that is that just in the same way that there have been all kinds of different things that we've done over the years, for example, to try to make driving automobiles safer. Those things initially did cause a change in the price of the automobile, but if you look at the price versus performance, capability, handling, comfort, fuel mileage, cars today are a lot better than they were when I first started driving.
Mm-hmm.
I think the same thing will happen with the grid.
Nadia, I believe you and I have chatted about the problem of getting regulators and supervisors and senior executives to make an investment in a substantial cost item that prevents something from happening that you can't point to as saying that is the result of this investment. How are you telling UTC allies and associates to address that problem of how do you rationalize and justify incurring costs that if they're successful, the need for them won't be apparent?
That's a great question. A couple of things. If it's an integrated buy, as Ed just said, it doesn't need to be justified within itself. I think the cost will show up probably in the discussion with the vendor where the vendor may need to do something extra to put security into the device. So unless it's a separate investment, let's say substantial amount of money for a security device upgrade, like buy a bunch of intrusion detection, intrusion prevention systems, it won't necessarily show up. I encourage people to think about security not as a cost but as an insurance. It is easier to demonstrate for data security, for data breaches, because we now know that Target is paying for most of us for, if you logged on to Target, they will be paying for your credit report for a year if you ask for it, because most of us do shop at Target and most of us were there at the time of year when that will happen. It is more difficult for capability type hacks when, as I call it, your system goes boom. But if we look at it as an insurance, it is a much better story than if we look at it as an investment. And then I do have to say that the regulators are very sophisticated. NARUC has a guide out, 35 questions that the regulators should ask. They're very thoughtful in how they approach this. So we also encourage the members to really work with the regulators and establish an honest dialogue with them about these things at the right level so that they can justify what they need.
Paul, we have two questions directed at you from the audience. One is, what steps are you taking to ensure data reliability and integrity? And the second, since BURPIT is, shall we say, your baby, what are you doing to prioritize tasks within the BURPIT framework?
Well, I'll start out that we're still building, and like I said, my boss wants to hear that it's done, but it's taking some time to build that and get it right, and so we're doing a lot of testing. So right now the priority is, I'll say the number one priority is that we continue to receive the data from our meters so that we can ensure that we're getting revenue from our usage. And so I have to keep that network up. I have to keep it pure, and I have to be able to bill on it. That's the way we stay in business. And that's really probably my number one priority. But I certainly have to make sure that my data is accurate for my customer's sake, because they depend upon us to accurately, bill them, and for both electric and water. So my priorities are certainly to test the nooks and crannies, because I am a believer that it's somewhat of a user error kind of problems, and as we're testing, we're finding system glitches. We see human error glitches that we're fixing and identifying. Those are the kind of things that you got to go through and vet out through that whole system to ensure that reliability and that correctness of that data.
Okay, Ed, we have a listener in Belgium who wants to know about how do you protect individual privacy rights. Certainly that's been a hot topic, both from the NSA controversy that's erupted in the United States, making everyone sensitive to the fact that others may be listening in and learning more than we know about our lives, to the scenario that played out in San Francisco with PG&E getting backlash from customers that did not want smart meters put on the side of their house. This European listener wants to know, how do you address those kinds of concerns and make sure people get access to the information that have a need to know it and protect it and guard it?
Well, that's first off, I think it's an excellent question. One of the things that I think the European Union in particular has done that is probably ahead of where we are here in North America, or most places in North America anyway, is this notion of personal data, data privacy, data security, and the importance of keeping that private data private. One of the things that we have done is to make sure that the data is not personally identifiable information if it doesn't need to be. And for example, if you think about a particular meter and a particular watt-hour reading, for example, some might consider that to be private data. The only real reason that the utility needs to match that up with a name and an address is for the purpose of sending a bill, typically, or sending a repair crew. And so in our systems, and in many related similar systems, the data of whose house it is, or the address, or the name of the person who pays the bills doesn't even exist in most of the system, and it's only matched up the places it needs to be. So that's one thing. And the other is sort of a fundamental idea called, generically it's been called privacy by design. And the idea there is to only collect data that you're authorized to collect, and only use it for the purposes that you're authorized to use it. And those principles, when you bolt those together, result in not only a more secure product, but a system that everybody's more likely to be able to use safely without having to worry about massive breaches of data, such as the kind that Nadja just mentioned a few minutes ago. Oh, the other thing I think I should probably mention there is that the publication that I mentioned earlier, the special publication 800-82, it actually addresses some of that. It's a bit obliquely referenced in there, but it's there if you look.
Now, do you want to weigh in on the question of privacy protection?
I really liked Ed's answer. Actually, I appreciate it, and I don't have anything else to add. I did want to mention, though, that 882 is currently out for comment, and it is one of those big, long documents, but I know NIST is looking for comments, so if anybody is thinking of reading it, you may want to also submit comments on it. And they do review comments, and they faithfully work on them.
So, of course, has been mentioned several times here, there's a lot of reports and studies out there. And to many in the industry, it may seem overwhelming with the different guidances and folks weighing in. One questioner wants to know about the materials that have been referenced like NIST studies. Is there any clearinghouse or place where you would recommend our listeners go to stay up to date on the most important new policies and studies that are coming out? Nadia, you want to address that first?
I'll start, and I wish there was. I don't believe there is, but there's a couple of places that these days one can go to, where last year it was more like 15. DHS consolidated all of their critical infrastructure support stuff into a single portal. So if the folks Google C-cubed program DHS, you will find a single URL where you can then, under there, in an organized way, organized according to the cybersecurity framework functions, you will find all of the DHS programs for the critical infrastructure. This is not just electricity, but nevertheless, you will find US CERT, ICS CERT. DHS has a number of documents for that, for critical infrastructure. You will find cybersecurity resilience reviews and a whole bunch of stuff under a single URL, and it's organized. So you can kind of go recognize yourself in there and then find the other stuff. NIST holds everything in one site. It's csrc.nist.gov. You can find the publications there, drafts and finals. And then Department of Energy also has a website where they house capability maturity model and various tools that, cybersecurity capability maturity model and tools that live with it. There isn't a one place to go to, and something that we do at UTC is we actually try to provide kind of like short, sweet snippets of information to our members about where to find the stuff that they need today. And there is an overwhelming amount of information, yes.
And any resources or websites that you'd like to point people towards that you find valuable?
Yeah, I think in addition to the one that Nadja's already mentioned, which I would also endorse, two that I think are probably fairly easy to remember. One is smartgrid.gov, which is in federal government initiative to serve basically that exact function, to try to serve as a clearinghouse of information. You have to hunt around on there if you're looking for something specific, but it's got a search feature. It's not too bad. The other thing I would mention is something that Paul had mentioned earlier, which is InfraGard. InfraGard is a public-private partnership to be able to share threat information more or less in real time. And I would highly recommend signing up to participate in that program if you are in charge of or related to having your smart grid made secure.
Paul, I'd like to turn to you for the last word. You have a utility IT shop to run, and I'm sure there are a lot of bells and whistles going off all day long. How do you stay abreast of everything you need to follow and coming out of agencies and policy-making groups and all the papers and research that are coming out? Do you have any suggestions on how to stay abreast of what you need to know?
Well, Google sometimes, but also I believe the Electricity Sector Information Sharing and Analysis Center, ES-ISAC, is a site that's recommended by the American Public Power Association as a clearinghouse for information. There are a number of those, and certainly InfraGard does try to do that, and I know InfraGard is having a number of meetings throughout the country where the main topic is information sharing. I believe there's one coming up in Chicago here, and I think it's the second or third one, but those are the kind of things that I certainly make time to read and stay abreast with and follow the kind of the documents that are within those websites, and certainly in my reading other things may be referenced that I follow up on to try to acquire and see if it applies to us. And then certainly working with Elster, they've certainly provided me information on such as Heartbleed here recently. They were quick to put that out, let me know what that was all about, what we could do, and what to look for, and how the systems remediated or stayed away from those kind of things. So certainly a good relationship with Elster is is key and important to me to stay abreast of those kind of activities likewise.
Great. Well, thank you, Paul, Nadia, and Ed for joining with us, and thank you, Elster, for sponsoring. PJ, I turn it back to you.
Thanks, Marty, and again, thanks to the speakers. Great presentation. For the audience, we hope you've enjoyed today's discussion. As you log off, please take a moment to complete our survey and to give us your feedback so that we can continue to provide you with quality content. Thank you for attending, and this does conclude today's presentation.